and welcome back to Beyond the To-Do List, a podcast about productivity. I'm your host, Eric Fisher, and I'm excited to welcome to the show Shira Gill. Shira is a professional organizer and author of Lifestyle, your guide to a more organized and intentional life. And in this conversation, we're talking about how minimalism is more than just owning less. It's about being intentional with your time, energy, and resources. Shira explains how managing the volume of commitments, creating simple systems, and forming supportive habits can transform your home and life. And if you're ready to simplify your life and focus on what truly matters, then this conversation with Shira Gill is for you. Well, it is my privilege to welcome to the show Shira Gill. Shira, welcome to Beyond the To-Do List.
Thank you. I am thrilled to be here.
Okay, I have to say this because I didn't say this in pre-record. Have you ever had people reference the character Shira, He-Man and all that?
Don't get me started. Yeah, I grew up in the 80s and it was pretty much all I heard.
Yes. So there you go.
Where's He-Man? All of the things. And it was so funny because I was so sensitive about it. And now I realize Shira, Princess of Power is a pretty good claim to fame.
Right? Exactly. Yeah. So no knock on you whatsoever. In fact, I was like, that's really kind of cool. So you've been talking about this topic for a while now. This is not your first book, but it's called Lifestyle, Your Guide to a More Organized and Intentional Life. I imagine that the book kind of was born from the story that you open it with, where it's this kind of relatable moment of, let's just call it total chaos. And you felt like, okay, I know where to go for the next book, something like that. Would you mind kind of sharing that story?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I have spent 15 years as a professional organizer in people's homes all over the country, editing, organizing, styling, all of the things. And so I fancy myself a fairly organized human being and certainly feel like I have it down when it comes to physical things in my home. But I think the story you're referencing is I was supposed to host a party at my house. And in the same day, our dog, we have an Australian Shepherd, threw up on the carpet. My back inexplicably went out, which had never happened to me. And both of my kids, I have two girls who are now teenagers, came home from school with lice. And so it was just this kind of moment of, as you said, total chaos and feeling like you can be super organized and super tidy and even a minimalist like me, but life is going to throw curveballs at you. And the kind of light bulb moment that I had was, I wonder if I could apply, this theory and process of minimalism to not just my home, but my life, which at that time felt overstuffed, both with my to-do list, my calendar, my schedule, all of my commitments. And this was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back moment.
And you mentioned minimalism. You mentioned it essentially being, people have become aware of that word. They have maybe misconception or preconceived notions about that word. I know you have your own definition that is this mindset of radical intentionality. How did you arrive at that definition?
Yeah, as a kid, I was raised by hippie intellectuals who really preached this ethos of people and relationships and experiences over things. But as a kid, I also found myself loving style and fashion and design. So there was kind of a push-pull for me. And the only examples of minimalism that I saw at the time seemed very restrictive, and the kind of image of the guy with a backpack full of stuff and this sort of aesthetic lifestyle that felt very, let me say that again. So kind of the image of a person with a backpack where all of their belongings fit in a backpack and they didn't have all of the fun things that I wanted as a kid. And so I guess without knowing it, I kind of invented my own definition of minimalism, which was about curating the exact right amount of stuff for you. Because I always hated clutter and I hated feeling like I was drowning in stuff. My parents divorced when I was quite young, and I went back and forth between two houses every other day, dragging my stuff back and forth. And so I think stuff became more suffocating than liberating for me. And so it was this sort of juggle in my head of like, I love all the pretty things, but I don't want to be encumbered by too much stuff. So I arrived at this version of minimalism, which is about clarifying what you want and clarifying your values, but then really methodically reducing the clutter and the distraction and the excess that stands in the way.
Yeah. And a lot of people, they hear that word minimalism or minimal, and they just think of the paring back down to almost nothing. They think of bare rooms with a single chair that they are allowed to sit on, or maybe just stand and look at, versus utility in any way, or even beyond utility, having any kind of joy or enjoyment. It's all, it's that uber, we'll reduce down to nothingness. And yet we don't give any of the reasons why. Because we take the reason why out, we can go to extremes with it.
Exactly. I think that's exactly right. And I think also there's a confusion around minimalist as an aesthetic, but I think of minimalism as a mindset. So it's a mindset around being radically intentional, not just with the things you own, but with how you allocate your time, money, energy, and resources. And what I found is really minimalism is a tool to help maximize your life. So for me, by owning less and doing less but better, I've really leveled up everything from my career to the things in my home to my friendships. It's really extended far and wide.
Yeah. And so in other words, you've applied your definition of minimalism and this radical intentionality to an entire lifestyle or your entire life, all aspects of life. And I love how you do that. And then you get into the book, you talk about these different rules. Would you break those down a little bit for us?
Yeah. So there's essentially what I realized after 15 years of editing and organizing homes. I realized there were three things, this kind of toolkit of three that were essential to create an organized home and life. And those things are volume, systems, and habits. So I'll kind of quickly break those down. So volume is just the quantity, right? So it could be the quantity of clothes in our closet or dishes in our cabinets. It could be the quantity of money in the bank or friendships that we have. And what I found is that most problems are not an organizing problem, they're a volume problem. And so there's a big sense, like when people come to me, they're like, I want to get organized. Tell me how to get organized. And the first thing I always do is assess volume. Most of us feel overwhelmed, overstuffed, overstimulated, all the things, just over it. And so number one is volume. Assess the volume. Do you need to turn it up? Do you need to turn it down? Number two is systems. And I think of systems as the easiest, simplest method of solving a problem. So an example of that could be, here's a recent example. My husband got into photography. He came home with a lot of photography equipment and it started being kind of littered and strewn all over all of the surfaces in our home. And so instead of getting annoyed with him, I had, a ding, ding, ding. He's putting the camera stuff everywhere because there's no system for where it lives. So I said to him, if I get you a big basket to put all of your camera stuff in, do you think you could plop it in the basket when you get home? He said, no problem, right? So I'm always looking at what is the simplest way of solving a problem, whether it's physical or mental or otherwise. And then the last one in this kind of trilogy of tools is habits. I and my fellow organizing colleagues spend so much time with our clients helping to edit and declutter and then set up systems. And I started hearing from many of my colleagues this frustration of, but then they would go back in 2 weeks and even the most brilliant, beautiful labeled systems would be rendered useless because their clients were still dumping things in other places. And so I realized, a system is only as good as the habit you follow to maintain the system. So what I talk about in the book is really starting with this values assessment around volume, then setting up systems, and then creating a series of habits and routines and behaviors so that you can, maintain those systems that you set up on purpose.
Great. Well, great overview. And I think that really gives kind of a perspective for everybody to kind of understand where you're coming from in terms of how you're approaching this. Tool one, volume. I love the double meaning of volume, where it's a measure of how much space things are taking up, but also loudness. And there's a correlation there that the amount of stuff in a space can be psychologically or emotionally or even physically, like it can feel like it's loud in our head.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the cost of clutter on our mental health has been heavily researched and has been equated with depression, anxiety, stress, overwhelm, paralysis. And I see this in my work all the time is, people who feel that they're busy but not productive, on the edge of exhaustion, stretched thin, burnt out. And it's because we're all trying to juggle too much, whether that's the things that surround us in our homes or the packed schedule or the items on our to-do list. There simply are so many hours in the day, right? So we've got to get really intentional about where we allocate our time and what we say no to, which is the hardest part for people.
So walk us through a little bit your decision-making framework when it comes to those commitments and, simplifying that, because if we're saying yes to everything, of course, that's one of the major funnel issues or noise, hence volume issues.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've got to start with a clarification of values, right? What do I deeply care about that's being neglected? What are the new results or outcomes I want to create in my life or work? I always love to ask, what do you want to do more of and what do you want to do less of? And so we always have to start with a position of clarity, even when it comes to editing and organizing a home. Otherwise, you're just moving piles around, right? So I start by helping people really have like a North Star of what they're working towards. I like to set minimalist goals. So for me, I've published 3 books in 3 years, right? And people say, how did you do that? It usually takes people 10 years to write a book. And I say, the key to my productivity is all the things I don't do. There are so many things I don't do that it would blow most people's minds, right? I say no more than I say yes. And I set 1 big goal a year. So if I'm writing a book, I'm not starting a podcast. I'm not doing a million influencer collaborations. I'm being really, really specific about the commitments and responsibilities I take on in my personal life. So I start with this framework of just what is important to you that's being neglected. And if you had to pick one big life or career goal for the year, what would that be? And I get really specific with people about making sure their goal is a SMART goal, right? Because what I find when I say to people, what do you want? What do you really want? They'll say very vague, broad things, right? I want my home to feel better, or I want to make more money, or I want to have more fun. And what I found is vague goals don't get you anywhere. It's kind of impossible to get a new outcome if your goal is vague. So I encourage people to really hone in on what is one specific thing or new outcome you want to create in your home or life or business this year. Then the second question is, what are you willing to give up? We don't want to give up anything. It's not fun to give things up or to say no. I pride myself on being an enthusiastic yes sayer. But what I found is if you say yes to everything, it leads nowhere fast. You get burnt out and stretched thin and you don't really do anything justice. So I like to have people actually make a list, like a not to-do list of all the things they're willing to let go of. And that could be looking at your time wasters. I love to do kind of a time wasting audit. So for me, my big ones are doom scrolling the news, scrolling Instagram where I'm very active and I can go down a rabbit hole and suddenly realize I've spent 45 minutes doing nothing, watching TV at night instead of reading. So it's really helpful to kind of get real with yourself about what are your specific time wasters? Where could you recover more time to invest in that big values-based goal? So what do you want? Why do you want it? And what are you willing to let go of to get it?
And it seems like this is a very internal, personal, first clarifying, but then also renegotiation of expectations with all the roles that you have, but also with yourself.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have a section in the book of all the things I'm not good at that I've decided to be okay with.
Well, you call it lowering the bar, basically.
Yes. The upside of lowering the bar is big because I think there is this kind of internal sense for most of us, for me anyway, of like, I want to be good at everything. I want to show up fully in every area in my life and excel. And really what I found is I can excel in a couple of areas. Like I can be a good mom and I can write a book at the same time, but I'm not going to be the fitness queen of America at the same time I'm being a good mom and writing a book. I just can't do it all. So some of the things that I figured out I'm terrible at, and it's okay, are technology. I'm glad that I made it on here with you today. And I figured out how to use a computer and a microphone, but that's really where it ends for me. And so in my home and life and business, anything tech related, I am delegating, I'm getting help with. I've just said, you know what, life is too short. I'm not going to be an expert at this thing. I'm also not great at cooking. And I'm terrible at meal planning, even though I'm a professional organizer. And so in our house, my husband loves cooking. I let him do as much as he's willing to do. And on my nights, I order pizza. And, you know, I used to have a lot of negative self-talk monologue about what that meant about me as a mom or a wife or a woman. You know, there's so much pressure. And I've just come to the place of like, you know what? Like, it's not in my zone of genius. I'm not going to waste my time with it. And I'm going to show my daughters I'm good at plenty of things. I'm good at running a business. I'm good at writing books, but dinner is not in my toolkit. So there's so many things like that I think I've just made peace with that have freed up a lot of mental time and energy.
I don't know if you're familiar with, a lot of people are, the book Strength Finders, where it lists off all your, you know, you find out your top 5, I believe it is, strengths out of all of them. And yeah, there's definitely weaknesses, but what they say is don't focus on your weaknesses. And this is what this sounds like to me. And what you're describing is, no, I know what I'm good at. And I lean in on those things, and those things that I'm, air quotes, not good at don't matter that much, because again, you could spend all the time rabbit holing into fixing those things. You could struggle learning to cook and, you know, insert here for anybody who's listening, but that time is better spent leaning into your strengths and using those strengths to not necessarily cover over, but actually what's great is, and you even said this is what's happening, your husband's strength of cooking covers your so-called weakness when it comes to that.
Exactly. And I got lucky enough to have a teenage daughter who also loves cooking. And so, you know, I'm like, I'll be over here in my lane, you know, working and making money and bringing in clients, and you guys handle the cooking and everybody's winning. Yeah, it's been really freeing, I think, liberating to lean into that level of acceptance. And even with my own business, you know, I've been running my own business for 15 years. I've had a lot of chatter in my head about the things I should be better at in my business. And what I found is instead of doing that, I just sell my strengths. So the only things I offer in terms of services are the things I know that I'm really good at. And those other things, I either don't offer them, or I refer to a contractor or bring someone else in where that's their strength.
You talk about simplicity in terms of creating systems. And I think that's the thing, is when someone hears the word system, they think big, complex, intricate, you know, advanced, and definitely not simple. How are you rectifying those two kind of polar opposites when it comes to systems?
Yeah. So I think especially for busy people, you want your system to be the simplest framework that works. So the way I define a system is just an organized framework or method. You could think of it as a set of tools or strategies that work together to solve a problem or achieve a goal. And what I found in my work is that the simplest systems are the easiest to maintain and therefore the most effective. So here's a simple example is I've had a lot of clients who have come to me saying like, my paperwork management system just doesn't work. And I don't get it. Like it's alphabetized, it's color coded, it's so organized. But what I find is there's just too much friction, right? And because it's so organized, like there is a thing as being too organized where it becomes too complicated to file something because you then have to think about what order is this in the alphabet? What color does this go into? Whereas my filing system is literally 5 big files and one says business and one says dog and one says car. And when I'm dropping papers in, I just put the most recent thing in the front of the pile. And so if I need to find anything related to my dog's medical records for the vet, I can just bring that file with me. But it takes me about 3 milliseconds to file a piece of paper. So that's an example I like to share just because I think people often think like the fanciest or the most elaborate system must be the best. I found the exact opposite. I mean, another very simple example is, I'm a mom, I have kids. They come in the house with their backpack and their shoes and their papers. The most elaborate system for that entryway does not work. But if I say to them, here's a big basket, when you come home, put all your stuff in it, they will do that. And their stuff will be put away and tidy. So it's thinking about, when you have a problem or a challenge to solve, asking yourself, what is the simplest system that would be effective at solving this?
Now, many of us, the problem is not setting up the system. It's then being consistent with the system. And your simplicity approach to it definitely helps with that. What about making a system stick or work longer term, even when life gets chaotic?
Yeah. So I think there's a few things at play here. So one of them is the motivation. You have to be motivated to maintain a system. And if you're not motivated, there's no chance you're going to maintain habits, right? You've got to have that spark of drive or motivation or bigger purpose. And so what I've seen when systems fall short is that the person isn't as invested as they need to be, or they don't have a compelling why. So for me, it's very important to me for my mental health that my house feels good and clean and tidy and spacious. And so even when I'm tired and I'm coming home with groceries and a dog leash and papers and an umbrella, and I don't feel like putting anything away, I have that bigger North Star of like, but it feels so good to have a home that feels like a sanctuary instead of a dumping ground, right? So I think the biggest, deepest work for people is just the why. And sometimes, by the way, that results in them saying, I actually don't care. Like I had a client who said, mess doesn't bother me that much. And she didn't live with a partner or kids, so it was just her. And in that instance, I was like, great, let's just make sure you can find your keys and get out the door, but it doesn't have to be perfect, right? For other people, they're like, I want my home to look editorial, like out of a magazine. I want to feel pride in it. I want to host parties and entertain. And so for them, then when they don't feel in the mood to put something away or maintain a system, it's like that bigger thing of I have a party coming up or I'm hosting and I'm so pumped to do that. The same thing can be at work. Like I work from home. My dining room doubles as my office. And it would be so easy for me to kind of just leave things at the end of the day. But we've got to use our dining room table to eat dinner. So that's a pretty compelling why. So I think it's for people who are finding themselves not maintaining systems, I would say ask, is my system simple enough? Could a 5-year-old do it? That's my test. I always do the 5-year-old test. If not, maybe I need to reduce friction, make it simpler, make it more intuitive, put it in a different place, make an environmental shift. And then part 2 is, why do I care? Right? If you don't have a good reason for why you care, then your system's going to be rendered useless. And maybe you can say, you know what? I'm not going to bother with this. This isn't that important to me.
I think another part of it comes down to checking in on the systems without feeling like you're doing an overhaul or homework about it per se. I know that you've got a Sunday meeting. Talk about how that helps with the friction.
Yeah. So, we're a busy family, lots going on, lots that can get very lost in the shuffle. And so after, the ninth time of forgetting some sort of carpool or, some sort of important family detail, I said, we've got to have a regular taking care of business meeting, just like you would at work, right? Like we're running a family. It's like running an operation, but we weren't checking in. We weren't communicating enough. So what we do now is we have this family meeting every Sunday night after dinner. My teenagers are a little bit resistant to spending their time this way. So I have integrated snacks and treats. So now they take turns. They get to pick the fun snack or treat. So maybe it's like ice cream or popcorn. So I get that in the house. And then all we do, it's usually about 20 minutes. We review the week. So we look at who needs rides where, and are those rides covered for sports, athletic events, etc. What are we eating? That's a big one. So we've had so many talks midweek where it's like, oh my God, there's nothing in the house. What are we doing? We have no plan. So now on Sunday, we map out what are we eating and what do we need to get into the house for the week. So we've got our meal plan, we've got our ride plan. And the last thing I do is I just give everyone an opportunity to say their wants and needs for the week. So with my teenagers, like an example would be, I need new hair rubber bands. Like it could be that simple. And then I'm like, great, I'm ordering them now, done. Or it could be, I haven't had a sleepover party with my friends in forever. Could I do that on Friday? So I just give everyone the opportunity to kind of like state your needs now, because when you ask me in the middle of the week when I'm working, I'm probably going to say no. But now is the opportunity to say, here's what would make my week feel really good. And we just do the planning right there and then in that moment. So then all we have to do is pick up groceries. I usually grab groceries Monday because I have a flexible schedule and the stores are much less chaotic. And then we're kind of off to the races. That like 20 to 30 minute has saved us so much headache, chaos, overwhelm over the months and years.
Well, and you describe tool 3, habits, as the scaffolding of our lives. And it sounds like this is that part. It's part of the scaffolding, and it's partly checking on the scaffolding there in terms of moving forward into the new week.
Exactly. And by the way, I mean, one of the things that quickly gets lost in the shuffle for me, and I think for other people, is your partnership. If you're working full time and you have kids and a dog like I do, it's really easy to forget about date night or just having some nice quality time with your partner that's not talking about who's doing the laundry and who's driving carpool. So once we kind of dismiss our kids from that meeting, I take an extra couple of minutes to check in with my husband and make sure we have at least a couple things on the schedule for the upcoming month that we can look forward to as a team.
So obviously habits is a whole topic we could talk. I mean, that's a whole podcast episode right in and of itself. But in the context of this creating a lifestyle or lifestyled, it's that third tool. Talk a little bit about how these tiny daily habits help you manage space and stress and the systems, et cetera.
Yeah. So I think, habits are the key to creating a life you want, right? It's a series of small, smart behaviors that get you closer to those outcomes you want. So I say without habits, you can't do anything new or exciting. And we all want to create new outcomes for ourselves. So I would say start by picking one small habit that you want to work towards and answer the following questions. 1, what is your primary motivation for making this change? What will change for the worse if you don't make the change? What will change for the better if you are successful? So make sure to clearly define your kind of personal compelling why before taking action. And then from there, you want to plan, how am I going to implement this habit? And, I think probably many of your listeners have heard about tiny habits and micro habits. What I have found is every time I try to implement a big new habit, I fail and fast. So an example is like, I really wanted to be fit during COVID and everything was closed. And I was like, maybe I'll become a marathon runner, but I had never run in my life. And so it just felt too big and too daunting, and I didn't do anything. And so then I said, what if I just wake up and the first thing I do is walk for 15 minutes? I'm going to get fresh air. I'm going to move my body. And whatever happens in that day, I'll know at least I was active for 15 minutes. So that was so small and doable. And I would, put my running shoes by the door, set myself up for success. I ended up taking a solo walk every day for 3 years. It really changed my life, and it gave me time to think. It was kind of like a moving meditation before I got into my work. And what happened was the 15 minutes turned into 20, into 40, into sometimes an hour. And this thing that I had always failed to do, which was exercise regularly, suddenly I looked at myself and said, I am a person who can exercise regularly. I'm doing it. And so it's looking at what's the big thing? What's the value or the goal? And how can I make it so tiny that it's almost impossible to fail? I think BJ Fogg in his book, Tiny Habits, talks about flossing one tooth. And I thought that was so cool, right? Because once you get out the floss and you put it in your mouth, you're probably not going to stop at one tooth. But telling yourself, I just have to floss one tooth and I am good for the day, gets you over that mental overload.
Well, in the book, you mentioned that a client of yours wanted to start meditating, but they felt overwhelmed. So they began with just 1 minute a day and grew it from there.
Yeah, exactly. In the home organizing world, I started this thing called the 15-minute win because I got feedback from so many people in my community that organizing a home feels paralyzing, and people feel that they just don't know where to start or how to start. And so I did a junk drawer challenge, and I said, all I want you to do is open your junk drawer, whatever's the kind of junkiest, messiest drawer in your house, set a timer for 15 minutes, empty it out, give it a nice wipe down so it's clean for a fresh start, and only put back in that drawer the things that you want and need access to. And people started messaging me from all over the world saying, I did it in 7 minutes. I did it in 4 minutes, right? This drawer that I've been staring at for 10 years, I just made into this beautiful, sparkling new system in under 15 minutes. And so I think for so many of us, it's just the getting started part of a new habit or system or routine. So the more we can trick our brain into, hey, brain, this isn't that hard. It's not going to take that much time. Just give me a couple minutes and let's see what we can do. I've seen such an incredible ripple of progress and change.
Yeah, I don't know which guest it was recently. In the past 2 months, somebody I was talking to got me talking about how I confessed that there was a project that I thought was going to take about 3 hours, and I'd been putting it off and putting it off. And I just said, okay, fine. I'm going to spend 5 minutes. I set a timer just to see what I can do about the first couple of steps. And in about 15 to 20 minutes tops, I had completed it and felt really conflicted because I felt really dumb about having put it off for so much, but I felt such an incredible win from it. And then eventually, healthfully, leaned in on that and just said, oh my gosh, stop overestimating how long the thing's going to take. You still never will know with anything, but you can at least give it 5 minutes to see what it's going to take. And that's where you get your 4 minutes or 7 minute drawer people.
Yes, that's exactly right. And I find if you add up all the time you think about dreading a task,
yes,
if you added up all of that mental anguish time, for me, it's, I mentioned technology, but something like recycling old computers is so overwhelming to my brain that I had a bag of old laptops that needed to be wiped and recycled in our entryway for years. And I finally just said, okay, I'm going to just 15 minutes, see what I can do. I Googled e-waste recycling near me, found a place 5 minutes from my home, drove it over, and they said, yeah, for $30, we'll take all of these, we'll wipe them in front of you and recycle them. And this thing that I had spent 10 years going, oh, I don't know how to do this. It's so overwhelming. My brain doesn't work this way. I was able to handle in 20 minutes.
Yeah, it's crazy. One of the things that I also thought of was this also goes for long-term projects that, okay, say we discover something is something that's ongoing. Well, then it's breaking that down, and you talk about committing to it like 10 minutes a day.
Yeah. Scheduling and automating things that seem hard to do. I call it baking it into your schedule. I think most of us are really good at showing up for a dentist appointment that's on our schedule. But if it says, clean out your junk drawer, we'll go, I can do that another time. So a big piece of it is just really getting values aligned with your calendar so that you say to yourself, I have put in the time to make my calendar reflective of the things I want to do and accomplish. So when I see those things, no matter what, all I have to do is show up and execute it. I don't have to think about it.
One of the other things that I noted as you kind of close the book out, you talk about how you use or reuse your own book's tools for yourself when you're in a burnout mode, which one, yes, kudos to admitting to the burnout, and two, that you're using your own stuff, which, eating your own dog food is one of the ways that sometimes that gets described as, and I love that. So thank you for doing that.
Hilarious. Yeah. I mean, my husband, whenever I'm stressed out, he's like, hey, I know some tools you can use. And it's so easy to forget, right? It's like that, the cobbler's has no shoes kind of. I think that's the expression. But yeah, I'll have to do it for myself and put myself in check quite often, admittedly, to be like, right, let's take a deep breath and look at volume systems and habits and apply them to my own life.
Yes. Yeah. And I think you even mentioned that one of your clients came back around to it 6 months later after they had gone through the book to do a reboot of their life because they had major things going on. And it was a great, way to reapproach everything like that. So, Shira, I would love to, point people to this book, your previous books, and everything else you've got going on. Where can we send people over to?
Excellent. Yeah. So my website is just my name, shiragill.com. I'm very active on Instagram, sharing 15-minute wins and before and afters. I have a Substack called The Life Edit, which is completely paywall free. And it's a great global community trying to do more with less. And then my books, I have 3 books. Minimalista is my first on how to edit and organize your home. Organized Living showcases professional organizers and their homes from all over the world. And then my new book, which you've mentioned, Lifestyled, and they all can be bought at your favorite bookstore.
Perfect. Shira, it's been great talking with you, and I can't wait to talk again sometime in the future. Thank you so much for sharing your experience, your wins, your losses, as well as your books and your insight. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. This was so fun.
Well, that's another podcast crossed off your listening to-do list. I hope that you enjoyed listening in on this conversation with Shira Gill, and I hope that you're taking away something meaningful to you about being more intentional with your time and your energy and your resources. And I hope that you're thinking about how you can use some of what you learned from this episode to create some of those simple systems and form some of those supporting habits that's going to help you with your home and your life. If you found something helpful in this episode, I would love for you to do me the favor of sharing it with somebody you know needs to hear it. Hit that share button wherever you're listening to this in your podcast player app of choice, or head on over to the show notes at beyondthetodolist.com, where you can also find links to help support the show through affiliate links or links to sponsors. Thank you so much for sharing. Thanks again for listening, and I will see you next episode.